Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Laura, adoptee, psychotherapist, adoption researcher and wellbeing advocate. Today I'm talking a bit more about one of the things that I mentioned in my last video, and it was internalizing behaviours. And I personally believe, and I have no evidence for this, but I do feel that internalized behaviours can very often come as a natural way of dealing with stress and anxiety based on trait. And if anyone has found any sort of correlation or links for that, I would be really grateful to read that research. But I'm talking about how many children, later teens, and also adults internalize their stress and anxiety. And essentially, what internalizing behavior means is that the individual attempts to deal with their stress and anxiety within themselves, for themselves, and they can be what we describe as all in their own heads. And this can be a very difficult experience for the individual who internalizes, and it can be very, very frightening for any parent who is involved with a person who internalizes their stress and anxiety, and also adults, because living with a person who does that can be a very lonely experience. But being the person who does that can also be a very lonely experience. So what are we seeing? Very often we're seeing children who are very withdrawn, very well behaved, very often very compliant in their behaviour, don't make a fuss, they don't complain. You might see that they don't sleep well, or they may grind their teeth in their sleep. They may have an interesting relationship with food, where food becomes a comfort, or inanimate objects become more of a comfort, such as cuddly toys, soft toys, things like that. The problem with internalizing behavior is that we know that when a problem is kept inside of our heads, unfortunately it doesn't diminish. Actually, it tends to become more problematic for us as we begin to try to resolve that, because what we don't have is the benefit of the externalization of the issue, which, as we know in therapy circles, brings relief, but also the benefit of other people's viewpoints and the ability to cognitively process what we're feeling. And so people who internalize tend to go down the route of very often low mood, withdrawing socially, finding themselves to be loners, if you like, spending a lot of time on their own. And so, as I said previously, it can be a very lonely experience, but it's also quite an uncomfortable experience if you're parenting a child who is doing that. And you may not even know that that's going on. As I say, that was certainly my experience, that I was very much an internalizer, all up in my head. I had millions of questions, and probably not an exaggeration to say millions of questions. And I had nowhere I felt to go with those questions. So that brings me on later to the benefit of therapy, as I've already covered in one of the 6 tools for adoptees of the future, when they're able to go to therapy, if that's something that's within your means for them to do that. But therapeutic relief can come in many forms, and it doesn't always have to be via a therapist, although I do feel later that's almost imperative when they get to the point of understanding their identity as a teenager. That's really vital. But therapeutic relief can start much, much earlier than that. So if you have a child who you are worried is internalizing their feelings and their fear and the trauma that maybe they've gone through as a result of being adopted, and or other traumas, sadly those will exist as well, then it's really vital that you offer them ways in which they can begin to channel some of those feelings. As a parent, you might feel that you want to be the way in which that is channeled out of your child, but unfortunately that's not always possible. Not everybody feels comfortable to speak about how they feel. Obviously with issues of trust, certainly around adoption, and if there's any kind of a trauma involved in those early experiences of having been relinquished, then trust is a very, very big issue, and we see the issues of trust running right the way through the lives of adopted people, and internalizers, externalizers alike. That's no different. But if you have an internalizer within your circles, then the trust is obviously going to feature when you try and sort of get them to speak with you. That's going to be a difficult obstacle for you both. So I would say it's really still vital that they find ways to channel those feelings. And one of the things that we do with children very often with success is creative endeavors. And that can be anything that we use our hands with. Is very, very therapeutic, but it can also help us to express exactly what it is that we're feeling, but without words. And certainly young children don't necessarily have the words to explain what they're feeling, but can find relief through other ways of dealing with what they're feeling, through drawing, through making clay, through baking, through cooking. All of these things that involve our hands and sort of creativity is really very, very, all of these things are very beneficial. So certainly try and get your younger child, if they're not yet able to write, or if they're sort of, their vocabulary is only just forming, absolutely, it's play therapy, really. And you don't want to be questioning your child at that point on what some of the things you're seeing mean. So if you are having a painting session and you're seeing it feels quite dark, don't ask that what that means, but do ask, where's that coming from? Where do you feel that is coming from? Is that coming from a place in your body? If it is, then whereabouts in your body? What does that look like? Does it feel big? Does it feel very small? Does it feel overwhelming? Does it feel dark? Those kinds of questions will help your child to explain the feeling and what the feeling feels like without actually telling you the source of the feeling at this point, because they probably don't understand the source of the feeling at this point. So it's kind of vital that you kind of don't question on that, but that you do encourage those sorts of processes. It's important that you validate the feeling's existence. In other words, you kind of want to let your child know that it's okay that they have these feelings. That's the point of these kind of activities, is to allow the child to kind of bring those feelings out. So you don't kind of want to give them a brief of what to draw or what to create. If it's kind of art therapy or sort of drawing, creating models, plastic, clay, there's lots of ways in which those frustrations might come out. It might just be that they're kind of externalizing the frustration through the strength in their hands, if they're kneading clay or plasticine. As I say, if it's art and it's coming out kind of dark or a bit, So what you want to be thinking about doing is encouraging dialogue around what it feels like. As I've said always, all the way through, this is the primary goal, is that you create an environment whereby your child can talk about how they feel. And they may not necessarily be able to explain why they feel like that. So for a lot of parents, that's a bit of a challenge, is that, you kind of want to know why. And as I always say, that's less helpful. What is more helpful is that you create an environment whereby they feel safe enough to express their feelings. So creating dialogue around it in terms of trying to show interest and compassion and understanding around the fact that these feelings exist is enough in the very beginning, because once that trust has been created, then your child will feel safe enough, or otherwise, to take that further with you and start talking about what it really feels like. But you've got to create that safe environment, first of all, for them to be able to have that expression of their feelings without fear of retribution or fear of anger from the parent or anybody else in their environment. So that's one thing that exercise is doing, that if you can sort of participate but in a passive kind of way, show interest, open up conversation around what it feels like, where it's coming from, what it looks like. Those kinds of conversations are really important early on. And that builds, as I say, the foundation of trust. And obviously the other function that's fulfilling is that for internalizers, we need to get the feelings outside. So it's providing a means for that to happen. It's providing a sort of a channel for those feelings to be externalized in a safe way. Because internalizing types, it's just not natural. It's not our default setting to put that outside of us. It's just something that needs to be encouraged slowly, and as I say, with safety, and so that can then result in trust. One of the things that I always talk about, be it internalizing type or externalizing type, actually is irrelevant. And when I work with adults as well, one of the things that I always recommend is journaling. And I talk about this quite a lot because people often look at me with confusion and say, I don't really get why journaling works or how it could possibly work. There's an awful lot of evidence now around journaling and the benefits that journaling brings. So free flow journaling is very helpful, and more especially for internalizing types who don't have the means otherwise to give a space, a holding space for their feelings. So if your child's of the age where they can write and read, encourage them to keep a journal. And again, they need to be confident in the knowledge that is their private journal, that you're not going to go into their journal and look through what they've written. But the fact that they can maybe write out some of their feelings and to have a space that's just theirs for them to explore those feelings is a very, very important thing. And the difference between a journal and a diary largely is that a journal is about the self, and the diary is about the outside, it is about the things that we do. So in my work, a journal would be more on a feelings level. You can talk about, anybody can talk about the things that they have done, but the journal takes it to the level of how those things have made you feel. What are the thoughts that you've had as a result of either doing those things or thinking about doing those things? How do you feel about some of the conversations that have had? How do you feel about yourself? What are the fears that you have? And I think it takes courage from a parent, because it can be hard to see and read. Not that you're going to be reading that, but it can be hard to see your child experiencing some of that. And I think that's often why parents in all sorts of areas stay away from these conversations. But please do remember that just because you're not having the conversation with them doesn't mean that those thoughts are not there. They are absolutely there, and those feelings are absolutely there. And we know that when they stay inside, they become bigger and they become darker and they can take over. So yes, I understand that it's going to be tricky for you. It's going to be heartbreaking maybe for you to see that the person that you love is going through that. But when you go into adoption, that's going to happen. There's no getting away from it. And in terms of adjustment and outcome, these kinds of processes help that to happen. And these are the things that help that child to adjust, and these are the things that help them to feel better about themselves. Teenage times are a really, really, really tricky time anyway, as I always say, because of identity and how we begin to compare ourselves with other people, our peers, and as individuals and humans in the world. We start to integrate the rules of society with our own truth and what we see around us. And so this is how our identities are formed. But an adoptee has a very different start, and they may have a start that they know nothing about, that they can't put their finger on and say that's who I am. And this is one of the bigger issues for adoptees. So absolutely, journaling for everybody, some sort of a creative pastime, I always say, for everybody, because it really is therapeutic. And again, there's research out there that proves that to be the case, that it brings relief. So journaling and a creative endeavour. Exercise is also vital. It's the anxiolytic effects of running, for example, are well known now. So it reduces anxiety, and then therapy if at all possible. But self-help therapies such as journaling can be very, very powerful. Later on, I'm going to be talking about some of the other self-care things that I would advocate to everybody in terms of our well-being, regardless, that those things that reduce the stress, that sort of reduce cortisol production in the brain and promote well-being. So I will come on to those later on, but as I say, just wanted to reach out to internalizers or families of internalizers today. And on the next video, I shall be talking a little bit more about externalizers and pointing out some of the differences there. All right, thanks for watching. If you're finding the channel helpful, beneficial, please like, comment, share, and tell your friends, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.